Hey everybody, this video is going to be a little different. I'm probably going to be reading from my phone, mostly. I wrote this article pretty quickly after the OGL stuff started to happen, and all the fallout of that. And I figured it might be better for a video, because I know not everybody likes to listen to things. Or, if they like to listen, they like to kind of listen on YouTube, whatever. I'm just going to start reading, okay? In the wake of the OGL announcement, many folks are flocking behind banners that promise to recreate bad business practices for the sake of strengthening their own brand. The big get bigger on the backs of pseudo-punk ideology, while the small, independent creators are left further and further behind. It's a wonderful time to be alive. Welcome to the show. Linda Codega, thanks to their sources, broke the story of the changing OGL last week when Wizards of the Coast silently sent some draft copies to a few folks and even asked some of them to sign it. I'm not here to talk about what the new OGL said or what it would change, because a ton of others, including Linda themselves, have already done that. I'm here to talk about what I care about and what I consider to be more important, which is the industry and the community. There's this rather naive belief that any of these companies like Wizards of the Coast, Paizo, etc., foster community through their gaming licenses. That these licenses encourage folks to make stuff for the game, and that they do it for altruistic purposes, the company, that is. When in reality, the OGL was originally created for company reasons. Money. When in reality, all decisions made by a business are done for the righteous, capitalistic pursuit of money. Ryan Dancy, former collectible card game failure turned Pathfinder Online failure, came up with and pitched the idea of the OGL to Wizards of the Coast. And he did so in order to, quote, drive support for all other game systems to the lowest level possible in the market, create customer resistance to the introduction of new systems, and steadily increase the number of people who play D&D, end quote. He said that by reducing the cost for people to support the game with their own products, more people will be looped into a feedback cycle where they inevitably support D&D as the one true game system. All the other reasons that are given by people online, like on Twitter or whatever, those don't have a source that comes straight from the person who, actually made the document or pitched the idea of the document.
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
I would say it's borderline revisionist to say that the OGL was anything but corporate greed. It was not for some perceived community, because a company cannot give you a community. Community is created by people. And companies, by definition, are not people. They are machines created to extract as much money as possible from the consumers. Here's an example. Over the last decade or so, after the 4E pushback, Wizards of the Coast came to the community, to folks who play D&D, to help with their next project, D&D Next. I remember this period of time. I was there. I had just failed college when I first saw D&D Next, and it got me. I was kind of a fanboy back then, so I was excited. But yeah, I remember that period of time. They released playtests, asked for feedback, published those feedbacks for people to read and, give feedback on the feedback. They hired unsavory people from the community, and then they helped those unsavory people harass independent creators. And then they didn't fire the person responsible for it, Mike Merles, and so on. There was other things that happened then, but those are the main important things. All of this to say that they relied on the community to make them popular again, and then to make D&D succeed. They did this through parasocial marketing. They talked to the consumers, to us, as if we were their friends. They made it seem like everyone was in it together, that the success of the product relied on us to support it. I mention all of this because Wizards built their triumphant return on the back of fostering a community, and people believed it. Wizards sold parasociality to folks in droves, creating a toxic fan base in the process. Despite the countless cries from freelancers and past employees that the company was fundamentally racist, sexist, and generally not good to work for, despite the first-hand accounts of mistreatment, despite publicly working with an open neo-Nazi, which I've covered in another video, by the way, and a serial harasser, despite showing their whole ass time and time again, people have let them slide on the back of this alleged community that they were fostering. There are D&D specific, not tabletop role-playing games, but Dungeons & Dragons exclusively, influencers who cosplay, make songs, YouTube videos, and so much more. people who built their livelihood on this product. There's an animated series on Amazon Prime based on a D&D campaign, which was actually a Pathfinder campaign to start with, but we got to go with the brand, right? There's a D&D movie coming out that stars Chris Pine, the guy from like the Star Trek movies, and I think he was in that not very good Olivia Wilde movie that came out recently. And there was also a TV show that they announced just this month. They did all of this while standing on your shoulders. They did this so they could make money off of you. Everything D&D related that people create is an advertisement for Wizards of the Coast, and they don't even have to pay folks to do it for them. I had to fix my glasses. Wizards of the Coast is not your friend. You might be friends with an employee, you might even make your living off of D&D, but the only reason they encourage this sort of parasocial influencer-style marketing is because despite the money it makes you, it makes them even more. The company is not a person. The company is a machine to generate as much money from you as it possibly can while paying its employees as little as it can. The as it can is the most important part, believe it or not, because as shown by the massive backlash to the OGL announcement, consumers get to decide what a company can get away with. We draw the line. It is my personal belief that scrutinizing a company is not only good, but necessary. You do not gotta hand it to them when they do the right thing, because that's what they should have been doing from the jump. And because time and time again, they will show their whole ass what is a company other than a miserable pile of apologies. The OGL is just the most recent in a long line of ass showings that Wizards of the Coast has come out of. I think it's fair of me to be glad that people are canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions, but also upset that none of their racism or employee mistreatment caused such an uproar. It seems that each time a company like this steps in poo, people not only have forgotten about the last 7 times they stepped in poo, but they still believe that that company can do better. Oh, let's take a drink. Enter Paizo. They are first and foremost a multi-million-dollar company that stages itself as the underdog of the industry by comparing themselves to Wizards of the Coast, holders of not only D&D but Magic the Gathering, and they're owned by Hasbro. Paizo has, for a very long time, painted itself as a little indie company with over 100 employees and, like I said, multi-million-dollar yearly earnings. They are allowed to do this by consumers because of the narrative that they created. That is to say, because they market themselves as such. They market themselves as small, just like you, and struggling to get by, just like you. And again, people buy it, hook, line, and sinker. Paizo has come under scrutiny before. Allegations of hostile work environments, racism, and anti-queer upper management. They are also alleged to have some of the worst pay and freelancer rates in the industry, which is something the employees have unionized to try and fix, but which still has not been fixed. After the OGL announcement went out, Paizo leapt at the marketing opportunity and announced the ORC. And it's worked wonders. You have consumers and employees already calling it the Orc Horde. You have Paizo running sales for their books. They are capitalizing on this because that's what a company does, and people are not only allowing it without criticism, they are defending it and championing it. Championing it. I cannot say that word. Don't know why I typed it. The important thing to ask as a consumer, even if you like Paizo, is why? Why would Paizo want to make their own open gaming license when several other TTRPG companies have already opted for the familiar and well-known Creative Commons? And for what that is, for people who don't know, it's an international nonprofit. The answer you get from a lot of folks online is that an open gaming license allows and encourages folks to create. As talked about before, that is fundamentally untrue. It's a narrative that was created by Wizards of the Coast to sell you more books, in order to put D&D at the center of the tabletop role-playing game universe, essentially. Cory Doctorow on Twitter said some important and pointed things about the idea of the OGL. He said, quote, "The OGL predates the Creative Commons license, but it neatly illustrates the problem with letting corporate lawyers rather than public interest nonprofits unleash open licenses on an unsuspecting, legally unsophisticated audience." And I think what he's saying is spot on. It's my belief that corporations do this sort of thing on purpose to foster a sense of authority and legitimacy that makes them seem like the that makes them seem like the final arbiters of creation. And Cory seems to agree, saying, quote, "Decades of copyright maximalism has convinced millions of people that anything you can imagine is intellectual property. This wholly erroneous view of copyright grooms normies to be suckers for every sharp grifter who comes along promising that everything imaginable is property in waiting. Wizards of the Coast created the OGL to give people permission to use things that don't require permission to use. They can't copyright the game mechanics that allow for a D20-based game to exist, nor can they copyright the procedures of such a game. So, the only benefit the OGL offers legally is that you can copy verbatim some descriptions of some elements that otherwise might arguably rise to the level of copyrightability, Kit Walsh says in their recent article, Beware the Gifts of Dragons. Kit goes on to say this, which I think is at the crux of the entire situation. Quote, accepting the terms of this license almost certainly means you have fewer rights to use elements of Dungeons & Dragons that you would otherwise. Absent this agreement, you have a legal right to create a work using non-copyrightable elements of D&D or making fair use of copyrightable elements and to say that the work is compatible with Dungeons & Dragons. Essentially, I believe that the OGL is a threat disguised as a promise. It promises, we will not sue you if you use these things, which extends to the threat, use it or we will sue you. And if you look online, I think my throat cracked there. I'm sitting on my floor, so I gotta like move around and stuff, or my body hates me. And if you look online, that is truly the fear most creators have. The fear of being sued at all by one of these big companies. It's true that most of us don't have lawyers, let alone the cash needed to litigate anything with a company that makes millions of dollars. But, and I ask this candidly to lighten the air a little bit, isn't that kind of fucked up? Why should we, as creators, continue to support any company that essentially threatens us with legal action if we don't follow their ultimately useless document that doesn't grant us any permission not already granted to us by law? Why wouldn't they instead help to educate their consumers and make it clear that legal action is only to be taken against other huge corporations or bad actors within the scene? I really don't care what the answer to that question is because it's rhetorical. It highlights the phenomenon I've seen online where fan bases are made to rely on the companies that they support in order to find safety in their creations. I cannot deny the anger that comes to me when big companies do something for the sake of capital that small, independent creators have already been doing for a long time, and they've been doing it simply for the sake of their fellow artists and humans. There are thousands of independent creators who have released their work under no licenses or Creative Commons who are excited for people to create adventures, hacks, and add-ons for their games, who pay people fairly despite living paycheck to paycheck, project to project, who add clauses to their own games that refuse to accept bad actors, bigots, and fascists. It seems to me that these companies have not only made people reliant on them, but made people fear them, to the point that Wizards' announcement of changing the OGL, again, a document that doesn't really offer you anything, sent lots of people into a spiral of fear and anxiety over losing their job, losing what little source of income they already have, losing their livelihood to a company that promised them a community and then turned and pulled the rug out from under them. I can't be mad at those individuals. I think directing any of this ire towards the individual is missing any sort of point. That kind of behavior, that sort of anger towards the individual, is strictly anti-human, unempathetic, and mirrors the same rhetoric and corporate moves bullshit that companies use, and I won't stand by it. What I can be mad at is the fervent rush to recreate the same circumstances, but under a different banner. What better to showcase the parasocial marketing of Wizards of the Coast than to see their parasocial competition? As I've said before, Paizo has staged itself as the underdog, despite the storied history of the company. Their ORC announcement is not for the sake of the community, it's for the sake of marketing. This moment was the obvious time to announce something like this. They followed it up with tweets and sales, all primed to make them seem like a safe haven for people afraid for their futures. They saw a moment to grow their audience, and they used the collective fear of an industry to do it. People are ready to defend them, too. Despite what just happened, people are quick to forget history. In the face of other companies opting for Creative Commons, Paizo instead planted a banner and asked people to use their 25% off coupon to join the Orc Horde and buy more books. There's talk of what this could do for the community, but no one is stopping to question what it would actually achieve and for who. Paizo has become this beacon for what is essentially a pop-punk retaliation against big corporations. Folks who want to be punks, who want to be seen as being anti-establishment. They are being pulled into Paizo's marketing against Wizards of the Coast. Even news sites fall into this, lobbing softball questions to Paizo's president as a form of free marketing for the company that already has. What I fear is happening now is just a further revisioning of history and reality. Paizo is not tiny. They are not independent creators. They are a company with over 100 employees who had to unionize because they were not being paid fairly. They are a company that milked its fan base twice for an MMO that will never be what it was promised. They like to stand below Wizards of the Coast and act like they're different, when in reality, they are still a company, with company goals and company motivations. Paizo does not have TV shows and movies, sure, but would they if they could? My guess is yes. I smudged my glasses there too. What I'm ultimately trying to say and get across is that the goal of a company making its own license, like it was for the OGL, is authority and legitimacy. Two things that they make us think we need to be given, or else we'll get sued. Which is frankly messed up and not how we need to be operating. Everything Paizo says will be to obfuscate this, because they are a company and marketing is all about narrative. If they can pay their lawyers to write up a new game license, they could also do literally anything else to help the community. There are already licenses owned by nonprofits that can do this work. Creative Commons can be put on only portions of your text. You can make some of it commercial, some of it non-commercial, some of it by attribution. You have some freedom with it. It's not just one license slapped on the whole thing and everything's done. Other than that, you can slap the Olivia Hill rule at the front of your book if you're terrified of bad actors taking your book to make propaganda. There are options already here that could use company support. I can't help but both be angry and hopeful about these sorts of shakeups, because in the year of our Lord, I have seen that independent creators can be supported, and that corporations can do the right thing, but that most just don't want to. There's a whole other discussion to be had about platforms, what they do and who they do it for, but it's in platforms that I see independent creators grow. That's where I see the future of tabletop games, not licenses. Places like itch.io are an actual haven for creators, because what do creators need to be supported, besides rent money? Places to put their work where other people can see it, which could maybe make you your rent money. Time and time again, this new model for doing things is proven to work. TikTok, YouTube, DeviantArt, Patreon, Steam. These are platforms that, yes, each have their own controversies, ownership issues, and problems, but they allow creators to be seen and make themselves heard. The same skepticism should be taken, of course. You always need to ask who owns the thing and why they own it. But even then, you see the next iteration of a platform and what it can be being created now in Nebula. Nebula is the perfect example of what the future can look like for independent creators. Nebula is a creator-owned Nebula is a creator-owned streaming service held up by some of the biggest names from YouTube. This is the power of a real community, realizing that you can directly support creators and their platforms as opposed to companies like Google who mistreat YouTubers and their unique art forms. If everyone can cancel their D&D Beyond subscriptions to try to stick it to Wizards of the Coast, I believe people can see that to truly stick it to them, we have to move away from them and the old ways of doing things entirely. Instead of flocking to recreate the business practices of old, held up by capitalism and greed, we can move forward into a world where we rely on each other, not a company, where these big companies need to do more for us to get us to go to them. If an independent creator can pay fair wages, there's no excuse for a big company. There's no more excuses. We need to demand more. We are worth so much more. It is good and right for communities to be critical of companies and not be eager for them to own our spaces. Thank you.